Hi, ladies. I hope you liked the Darwin and Wallace video that you watched in the last class. So I just want to give you an overview of what we're going to be doing today, assuming that my computer is happy. Okay, here we go. So day two, the first thing we're going to do is go over the movie about Darwin and Wallace with the screencast that you're currently in. Then you're going to self-check the making of a theory questions that you did the other night with the key. And if you just click on the key here or the link in Google Classroom, you'll be fine with that. Then you're going to watch a What is Evolution video by an organization called Clearly Stated, or a channel called Clearly Stated. I think it's really good. You're going to watch the movie called Natural Selection and the Rock Pocket Mouse. And then finally, you're going to complete the questions for the Rock Pocket Mouse movie. And all of this is going to be done in a Google document that's called Day 2 Evolution. So you'll see a table with that, all of these to-do items listed in there. And then you're going to submit that same Google Doc called Day 2 Evolution on Google Classroom. Okay. Oh yeah, there we go, sorry. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is just give a little bit of a video recap of what you saw in the film the other night. Okay, so here we have Alfred Russel Wallace, and you remember when he was sick, he came up with the same idea that Darwin did about how species do change over time. They are not fixed. They are not a result of some divine creator creating them instantaneously, perfectly suited to their environment, but that species actually do change over time. Sorry, I have a runny nose. It's allergy season. Okay, and so what they're saying that they're not created, that species are not created divinely or by some deity, is that there's a natural explanation. There's a natural origin for where species came from, where organisms came from. And that these species, these organisms do change over time. And that's what we call evolution. So you're going to hear lots of definitions of evolution in this unit. So I don't want you to get bogged down with memorizing a word for word verbatim definition of evolution. Think of evolution in a biological sense as species changing over time, populations changing over time, not individuals changing. I'm going to change over time. My hair is going to get grayer. I'm going to get more wrinkles. My skin's going to look different. And I'm changing over time, but that's not biological evolution. That's me aging. And we'll get more into what evolution specifically is in your video tonight or today. Okay, so there's a natural origin for where species came from, and that species do change over time, and that the how do species change over time? How do populations change over time? The mechanism for how species change over time is what Darwin and Wallace called natural selection. There is no person doing the selection. There's no natural selector, but natural selection is just individuals having different breeding success. And when we say breeding success, we mean reproductive success. And we call that an organism's fitness. So make sure you write that down, fitness. So I'm all fitter than you. Most of you can probably run faster than me, but I am more fit than you in a biological sense because I have had children. So fitness is your reproductive, how many individuals you have left for the next generation. I've left 2 individuals to the next generation. None of you have had kids, so you are not as biologically fit as me. Okay, so we'll get more into natural selection in your Rock Pocket Mouse video. So really, Wallace and Darwin both had this idea that species change over time, and that all organisms, whether you're a fungus or a giraffe or a bacterium, all organisms are related over time. So if you go to the root of a branch or the beginning of a branch, a species branches off into two species, and then this species branches off into two more species, and then this species branches off into two more species, so that there's a relatedness among all organisms on life, including those that are extinct. And that's the same idea that Darwin had. In fact, he wrote this word, I think, and he said, oh, number one down here, this is our ancestor. And this ancestor gave rise to these three groups, or these three species. And then this group led to these three groups, and so on and so on. So all organisms on Earth are related through their ancestors, just like you and your first cousin are related through your grandparents. All organisms on life are related in some way through their ancestors, just like you're related to your first cousin through your common ancestor, which is your biological grandparents. Okay, so let me move my face out of here. Okay, so since there's a natural origin for species, and because organisms change over time, species change over time, excuse me, that's what we call evolution. So really a natural origin for species, and the fact that species change over time explains relatedness. For example, you saw in the video that there are these giant tortoises on the Galapagos. So tortoises are land-dwelling organisms, and turtles are typically water-dwelling creatures. So these are land tortoises. And he's like, whoa, what the heck? Why are there these huge tortoises nowhere else in the world except the Galapagos Islands off the coast of Ecuador? And they seem similar, but not exactly like each other. So this species is found on one island in the Galapagos archipelago, and an archipelago is just a series of islands, like Hawaii is an archipelago. And here is another species found on a different island. So how can we explain that relatedness? Well, if there's a natural origin for these turtles, or these tortoises, excuse me, and if species can change over time, well, this is possible. You know, these probably descended from a common ancestor, just like you and your cousin, first cousin, descended from a common ancestor. Okay, and same thing with these finches. He noticed these mockingbirds are somewhat similar, but not completely. So clearly they are related to each other. Natural origin of species and evolution also explains the diversity that I showed you this picture the other day. How do we get such enormous diversity? Well, organisms live in different habitats. There are different environmental pressures. That's going to affect who lives and who dies. And then finally, a natural origin and evolution also explains the fossil record, right? Darwin saw these modern armadillos down here, and he noticed, hey, they're kind of similar to these glyptodonts that are extinct. Okay, so the mechanism that Darwin and Wallace came up with is what we call natural selection. So let's just pretend that this gray circle here represents a population. And to remind everybody what a population is, we had that term earlier in the year, but it's been a while and I didn't ask you to memorize it. A population is a group of individuals of the same species in a specific geographic area. So for example, this gray circle could represent an ancestral tortoise, a lot of individuals of an ancestral tortoise. And suppose all of the individuals are gray. Well, what might happen is that DNA can mutate. And DNA, when it mutates, that can create variation. So some organisms, some individuals in the population might be white, some might still be light gray, and some might be even darker gray. Okay, now suppose it's not advantageous to be white, okay, because you stand out against the environment. Well, you're going to get eaten by everybody else, by your predators, so only the light gray and the darker gray are going to survive. So if you're dead, you can't reproduce. You can't pass on those white genes to your offspring. Okay, so clearly the light gray and the darker gray leave more offspring than the white individual because he's dead. And they keep passing on this, their grayness because it's heritable, right? It's based in DNA. Okay, so again, these light grays tend to stand out more than the dark grays. Perhaps these blend in better with their environment than the light ones. So these organisms are going to survive. These individuals are going to die. If you're dead, you can't pass on those light gray genes. Oops, I forgot to highlight. I forgot to make this little box disappear. But then we would see this gray and this even darker gray reproducing. And again, it looks like the population is so well suited to its environment because maybe it's a dark background. And it looks like this organism up here mutated on purpose, but that mutations occur at random. Organisms can't evolve what they need. Okay, and next part about the video that I want to share with you is that when we can compare the fossil record, so this big glyptodon here, we can determine the evolutionary relatedness. We can reconstruct the evolutionary history of organisms. So for example, down here we have Mysticetes and Odontocetes. This is the baleen whales, and these are dolphins which hunt. So balleens are like filter feeders. They eat little plankton. Okay, so if we, like, where do they come from? Like, where do whales come from? Did they come from fish? Au contraire, mon frere. Whales do not come from fish. They are mammals. They have to come up to the surface to breathe. They actually came from a little wolf-like creature. Well, they didn't come exactly from, but this is what we think is most closely related in the fossil record, or the next closely related organism to the group that gave rise to whales. So whales and dolphins, their closest relative that's currently existing right now is the hippopotamus. And how do we know this? How do we know that mammals were in the land and then they moved their way into the ocean? Well, we can find fossils of what we call intermediate forms to see how there have been slow changes over time that have accumulated and have given us whales. So yes, whales evolved from a small kind of wolf-like creature in like 10 million years. Pretty exciting, and probably we might see a movie on that later. Okay, and then finally, so going back to the tree of life here, all living things, whether you're a primate or a goat or a bird or a lizard or a snake or Nemo over here, fish, all organisms are related through common ancestors. So this is what we call the tree of life. Everything in the world is related. So we're over here, we're primates. We are more closely related to goats than we are to owls, than we are to fish, because we share more recent common ancestors, but all living things are related. And hopefully you popped into the bathroom by the biology lab and were able to see that tree of life at some point. Okay, so just to kind of wrap it up here, we've got Darwin over here, we've got Wallace. Darwin published his ideas in The Origin of Species, a very famous book. I've read it multiple times. It's not a good beach read. Probably only if you're going to major in biology would you ever read that. And then this is Alfred Wallace's book, and he called it Darwinism, the Theory of Natural Selection. So the point is here, both of these men made observations of the natural world, right? Darwin and Wallace both traveled around the world, saw how species are only found in certain locations, and then there seems to be organisms closely related to those species in geographic areas. So by making observations and coming up with ideas and then testing those ideas, Darwin and Wallace came up with one of the greatest theories of all time, the theory of evolution by natural selection. And you'll learn more about that today in your next two videos. Okay, bye girls.